Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal. It is Thursday, February 23rd, 2023, and today I am covering the paranormal and H.P. Lovecraft. As always, you can find all of the shows along with links to social media and other ways to contact me at the podcast page, and that is salcidoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions or stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others that you trust. Happy to either read those or have you join me on the show to talk about them. And so also I want to thank everyone for listening to the show, whether you are able to be here live or you listen to the podcast or YouTube feeds. Especially since the YouTube feed, just as of yesterday, the channel reached just over 12,000 total views, which is really amazing. So thank you all for listening over there and also to the podcast feeds. And yeah, it's those numbers, the way they keep rising, just I know it probably shouldn't surprise me anymore, but it always does. So definitely appreciate it. And of course, now that I'm back to doing shows 5 days a week, this show is the last show for a couple of days. So 2 days basically, and I'll be back after today on Saturday night, Sunday morning, depending on your time zone. And start the new week all over again. So, like I said before, I can technically do 7 days a week, but it is a lot of doesn't leave much room in my mind to focus on much else. So I decided I better stop. So I think that's all the announcements I have for now. I've already put the articles I used for today's show in the chat, and I will include them in the episode description. There is way more there than I'm actually going to be able to cover in a single show. If you want a full biography of H.P. Lovecraft, that first article is a decent way to start, I would say. And I'm just going to read a few of the bullet points that it has in the very beginning, just in general terms about Lovecraft. And we'll get to the paranormal aspects of everything probably closer to the middle of this episode here. So let's see here. This first article I found is from thoughtco.com, and the title is Biography of H.P. Lovecraft, American writer, father of modern horror. So again, this is a very long, at least as far as using it for a show, decent length article here. So it has these bullet points here near the beginning. It says, Fast Facts, H.P. Lovecraft. It says, full name is Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Known for writing, of course. Born August 20th, 1890, in Providence, Rhode Island. Parents were Winfield Scott Lovecraft and Sarah Susan Lovecraft. Died on March 15th, 1937, in Providence, Rhode Island. So he lived to be 47 years old, right around there. It says, now this is something that I didn't know. Education, it says, attended Hope High School, but did not earn a diploma. Now, this is partly because of basically being physically and possibly mentally ill, even as a child. That led him to miss a lot of school, even though he still went on to study different subjects while at home. It lists some of his popular stories here. Of course, we've covered most of the stories that he has, maybe even possibly all of them, in previous episodes, but it mentions The Cats of Ulthar, The Call of Cthulhu, At the Mountains of Madness, The Horror at Red Hook, The Shadow over Innsmouth. And those are the ones it mentions there, but of course, as we know, if you listen to any of the other Lovecraft shows, there are many other stories. Says that his spouse was Stonia Green, and it says notable quote. And I really like this. I think this is gets to a lot of the core of what it is writing, and I don't know that I can't really argue with this quote in a way. At least I can see where he would come up with it. It says, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. So I thought that was a really neat quote. You can sort of see that in a lot of his writing, as we've covered in a lot of shows. And so yeah, that's just some quick facts. Again, you can check out that article for a more full biography. But of course, what we're mainly interested in, at least for me anyway, is his connections to the paranormal in terms of what were his inspirations for writing and getting into the horror genre and the paranormal and science fiction and horror genres of writing, basically. So that's I found this next article here, and I think it sort of is a good way to go about this, looking into this topic here. And this one is from mentalfloss.com. The title is 7 Obsessions That Influenced H.P. Lovecraft's Work. So, and a lot of these kind of tie in with each other, but I'll just go through them. Of course, the first one that says here is space and astronomy. And so it mentions that, again, when he was a child, he basically did a lot of looking into other topics, especially astronomy, while he was unable to be at school. But he even after he got out of school and basically left, or did not graduate school, but left, I guess, school, he was known as a reclusive apparently, but there was more of a case, this article says, where he had a close circle of friends, and he would travel around England and beyond. It says that during his teenage years, so yeah, it was during his teenage years that he was stuck at home a lot, I guess. It says that even at the age of 9, he started making his own, I guess, scientific newspaper kind of publication known as a Scientific Gazette. And then years later, he self-published the Rhode Island Journal of Astronomy and began submitting astronomical articles to local publications. He got his first telescope at the age of 13, which, of course, aided in that interest and investigation into astronomy. Now, of course, a lot of this influenced his writing in that a lot of the creatures from the stories that he wrote, they existed in other parts of space. And they would come to Earth in different ways. And there'd be different creatures that would that were out in space that would come to Earth, even though they were only vaguely interested and they're indifferent to the people on Earth. And even though they would still be sort of out on their own missions, even if it meant killing and or driving people insane just by their presence alone. So mentions a couple of his stories here that were influenced by this. One is the Color Out of Space, thought by many to be one of basically Lovecraft's most science fiction oriented story. And that is the one that features a meteorite that has strange qualities that then that falls from the sky and that then horribly alters the land and also the people on the land. So, and then mentions another story here, The Shadow Out of Time, talking about two alien species that exploit Earth for their own purposes. So yeah, definitely there's a lot of, you could say almost all of Lovecraft stories deal with aliens of one kind or another. So definitely a common theme in a lot of his stories. So the next section they have here in this article, the next influence, they talk about the past. And this is sort of almost an opposition or the other end of the, really, if you want to look at science fiction as a related to time in the future, he also had an interest in the past, whether it was mythology, ancient Greek mythology, and also history. And then he was also interested in the basically the history of let me see here, 18th century England. And he even so according to this article, apparently he wished that the British had won. So he also adopted 18th century spellings in his words. I always wondered about that. And you can see that in some of his stories. They give the word show as an example here. Apparently at one point it was spelled a different way. It was SHEW. So, and then, and of course, he also had an interest in New England colonial history and Puritanism, and that is what showed up in a lot of his stories, along with architecture. There's so much architecture in so many of his stories, whether it's familiar architecture of those times that you could almost recognize if you saw pictures of it, or even alien architecture. Doesn't really say this, but I'm just kind of remembering a lot of his stories. It does talk about a lot of alien architecture in different places, whether it's underwater or in remote places on the planet where it's really hard to get to for people. There's definitely a fascination there with buildings, so I do agree with that for sure. And buildings can be haunting in their own way, even without anything paranormal going on. Whether it's they're designed that way or if it's because of the passage of time, I think that they can be, even if there's nothing going on there. Places can feel like there's some energy there, even if nothing happens. I think I've definitely experienced that, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So, let me see here. Let me look at the. Okay. So, looking back at the article here, I think that's it for that one. Yeah. All right. And then it talks about the next obsession or influence that he had was his own family's past. So, H.P. Lovecraft's father, unfortunately, was confined to a mental institution when H.P. himself was very young, forcing him and his mother to live with his grandfather, last name of Phillips, at the family mansion in Providence. And these were, it says that they were, he loved this time overall, other than having to deal with the thought of his father in this institution. He was still in this mansion. He basically was part of sort of the upper class of society. But this didn't last, and eventually the family fortune started to decline, especially with the passing of the grandfather. That led to the basically the family losing most of their money. They had to sell the estate, and so they were basically had switched classes, so sort of like social classes, um, in a relatively short period of time. Had to move to a smaller house, and it says here in the article that Lovecraft never got over the loss of the family estate, along with associations of status and happiness tied up with it. So, and you can see that in a lot of stories too of his. There are these people that sort of start out in very comfortable situations, and either because of paranormal things going on, um, or just their own interest in history again in the past, they end up getting into trouble with various entities, that lead to either, in some cases, their death, but in other cases, just madness, where they lose their positions in society. So, mentions that, goes into a little more about his personal life here, but even after the family lost the mansion, Lovecraft took a lot of the items from that place that used to be in that place with him wherever he went, even though it was things like fine linens and plates. So he did marry for a short time, but eventually, and that was another brief time where he was financially stable thanks to his wife, actually. But eventually, that ended as well, with her having to move away, and so it mentions here that in a lot of Lovecraft's stories, there's the, let me see here. It says Lovecraft many gentleman scholar characters point to his idealization of upper crust life at the Phillips estate. So again, this idea of sort of changing lifestyles, and not, in his view, for the better. This next one is one of those where it makes sense, but it caught me off guard. I wasn't thinking about it in this way. But when I read it, I think and those of you who have been listening to a lot of these shows, these Lovecraft shows, it will, or Lovecraft anyway without these shows, it'll make sense here. Let's see here. I lost my space. There we go. So, it'll sound odd, but it is true, apparently. His next obsession and influence in the stories is seafood. In other words, sea creatures. So, growing up, he didn't really have to. He could basically eat what he wanted to, and including mostly sweets. And it says that he had the palate of a 5-year-old here throughout his adult life, and so one of the things that he never did care for, and in fact seemed to hate it, was seafood. Now, if you think of so many of the creatures in his stories, you have frogs, you have octopus, you have fish-like people, very aquatic-oriented creatures in a lot of his stories. So this is, they give an example of this. Apparently this is even a quote, so that's, I guess, how they are figuring this out. It says that on an occasion when a friend tried to take him out for a steamed clam dinner, Lovecraft, says he rarely swore, reportedly declared, "While you are eating that damned stuff, I'll go across the street for a sandwich. Please excuse me." So, that doesn't really say that give a exact cause for his hatred of the food. That might not be known, but It is ironic in a way, but it also makes sense why he would include all of these sea water creatures in his writing as the main. Um, I don't even want to say villains necessarily. They're not all really. They don't so much care about people. Um, that's a good point. I don't know. Matzal says that's crazy. How do you not like seafood if you live on the coast? Yeah, that sounds like it wouldn't have been easy. Um, that I don't know. I guess it's possible now. Probably easier now than it used to be, as well. I would guess there's limited options the further back you go, but I could be wrong on that. I don't know. Um, but I just found that to be it fits, but it still surprised me. I didn't expect that to be the case. So let's see here. The next one here, the next influence and obsession it has is religion and the occult. Let's see here. One moment, please. Okay, sorry about that. My nose is bothering me. And what's ironic about that as well is that according to this article, Lovecraft himself was even though it says he had pagan inclinations as a child, it says that Lovecraft was a staunch atheist and self-described materialist, and yet he featured so much of superstition and occult practices in his stories. But it says here that he thought of them, like the idea of magic and rituals and things, almost in scientific terms. In other words, that they were just scientific methods that were just not understood, or that were difficult to understand. And so it mentions that his concept of cosmicism rejects the comforts of religion, instead presenting a cold, indifferent cosmos, absent of what basically of any kind of all powerful figure. So, and that's sort of seen in a lot of his stories again with these creatures that go about their business, and if that doesn't matter if there are people involved or not, they're going to do what they're going to do. So that's that makes sense given a lot of his stories that involve creatures that are just going about their own business, and people sort of get involved or stumble onto them and then end up paying for it. This next one is, of course, the darker part of Lovecraft's personality that you see in some of his stories, which is the whole, as I mentioned a little while the last time I did a Lovecraft episode, his is basically his xenophobia and racism. It is something that comes up in some of his stories. Again, I don't support those kinds of views. And so what I tend to do when I come across them in fiction is just put them out of mind, because I think you can do that and still get something out of whatever you're looking into. In this case, this connection to the paranormal. So I'm not going to really go into that, except to say it does say in this article that says toward the end of his life, he began to soften his views and to grow more accepting of people who were different from himself. So maybe that's a good sign. I mean, I think it's a good sign. But anyway, then that is something you'll find in the stories. I do recommend you just kind of work through it and just skip past those parts, and because there's still plenty in these stories, as I've described, that if you are interested in the paranormal, there are some connections there that can be made. So, and I mean, it does show the sort of, I think what I think of as more the darker side of some people and some of the characters in the stories as well share that kind of personality or that kind of thinking, unfortunately. So let's see here. The last thing that mentions in this article here is the idea or the concept of madness being, something that he had to deal with in life with his own family. Of course, his father being in a mental institution, and it does mention here that his mother was not the most stable as well. And so he had fears of basically because of that, because his parents seemed to be unstable, he had fears of that possibly being passed down to him. And so it mentions here that a lot of the stories end with these characters who have these experiences with these various creatures and or beings and or worlds, in some cases in Lovecraft stories, where this this new knowledge drives them crazy. It also does, I believe it talks about it in here. So yeah, a lot of Lovecraft's psychosomatic illnesses that he had growing up led to extremely vivid dreams as he was growing up. And so we know that, dreams can be they can stay with you for a long time and influence you in different ways. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of those dreams did lead to the writing of some of his stories. And so, yeah, so that mentions the Lovecraft, his point of view that in the cosmos is one, as it says here according to the article, is as one in which man existed side by side with knowledge that, if comprehended, would send him over the brink. So, and it has I'll just read this last paragraph here, which I think does fit this whole summary of Lovecraft. It says, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, and this is from, let me see here, The Call of Cthulhu. This is from the beginning of that story. It says, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but some day the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. So that's the end of that article, and I think that's a good place to move on here from there. But yeah, I do think that a lot of Lovecraft's stories revolve around things that he may have seen in dreams and his own family history, his own preferences and dislikes of things that he encountered in his own life, whether it was food or society in different ways. And then his ideas of the universe and what might be out there. Um, they all definitely seem to play a part in his writing, all of his story, his so many stories. So, and I just have one last thing I want to mention here. Just he wasn't just influential to people who are into sort of horror, or the paranormal, or science fiction. He actually, his writing led to the creation of a whole field of, I guess, scholarly research known as Lovecraftian studies or Lovecraft studies. And this is the body of research that has emerged surrounding the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And the one thing, one of the other things in these articles that I read was that he, his writing at the time was not super popular. It didn't actually gain traction until years later, and even especially after he had passed. To the point where, even though there were other people that were writing in similar styles or subjects at the time while he was alive, who were more famous or well known, they sort of faded while his writing became more popular. So that's a interesting thing that happened. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed going over all those stories. I think that it is possible that he was contacted by one or more other beings while he was sleeping in his dreams. I wouldn't be surprised. Who knows the reasons or the messages that he got if he put them all in his stories. I'm sure he wasn't able to describe what he saw in his dreams exactly, nearly as easily as, or nearly as well as what he did describe. I wouldn't be surprised if the things that he actually experienced in his dreams were even more monstrous or frightening in the cases where they were not pleasant dreams. And I sort of wonder where he is, if there is any kind of afterlife, where he went to, and what he is, what he would be doing now, or even if there's a way. This is sort of a thing I wonder too when it comes to. I've talked about before how I wonder. I think that when it comes to what we call fiction, if there aren't places where these universes do exist somehow, where all these stories take place, especially when you have, as I mentioned, I'm not sure if I mentioned it on this show or another show, but think of the popularity of. I'll just start with any of the Marvel or DC comics, or even Star Wars or Star Trek universes. You have just so many people creating stories, or coming up with stories, or maybe possibly, if we want to go fully into the paranormal here, receiving visions of these stories, and then sharing them, and making entire franchises surrounding these other places and other times in these other places where these stories happen, because they actually do happen. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a thing. Of course, I have no way to prove it, but that makes me wonder about Lovecraft, in that we know there is a thing that is said to exist, that is called a tulpa, or a thought form, where people intentionally will focus on creating an image and the personality attached to that image, using their own minds and their own energy, and then eventually that focus, that point of focus will sometimes, according to many stories of experiences, start to act on its own and appear to be sentient. And if that's the case, then I wonder about some of the creatures, especially in Lovecraft, especially with the popularity that he has gained over the years, and his work has been turned into so many things, whether it's movies or TV shows or role-playing games or video game characters or video games, comic books, whatever, any number of things. And then you have, as time goes on and the material becomes easier to access by more and more people, especially as maybe copyright laws start to expire on the who can and can't use it in terms of that, as far as that goes. If it won't be incorporated into more and more projects and added to more and more stories or other fictional universes, let's say in Marvel or DC or wherever, if it won't expand, and if there isn't some place out there where all those beings, Cthulhu and all the others, do exist out there, if there is some kind of multiverse where they exist on their own version of Earth. So, of course, that's going way out there, but that's what I like to do when I can. So, that's it for Lovecraft, at least in terms of topic-specific episodes. I'm going to, over this next couple of weeks, these next couple of Wednesday night, Thursday morning shows, I will be going back to reviewing the other Stephen King books that I have read that I haven't covered yet, just to give myself a little bit of a break before jumping into another sort of a series of shows, thinking of covering mythology and just summarizing the stories and or the characters' lives, and discussing the paranormal aspects of those stories and characters, and sort of just doing an extended series on that, digging into as much mythology from around the world as I can possibly find. And I do have a website in mind for that, so we'll see what they have, and then we'll go from there. And so we'll see how that goes. I've never done it before. I have no idea how it's going to go, but we'll give it a try once we get there. And I think that's going to be it. I'll be back on Saturday night, Sunday morning, of course, to start a new week of shows. And that will be True Paranormal Stories from the Web. And I'm also doing a guest appearance on a podcast this Friday. It's not going to be live, but I will share the link to that once it comes out, once it is available. So, thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all next time on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal. Take care, everyone.